That was a terrific presentation, very much appreciated. I had the pleasure of visiting Hong Kong in 1996, and so somewhat familiar with the basic models, and obviously you have moved both in terms of development and I think in terms of, and obviously in terms of institutional changes, maturation, however you want to describe it, very dramatically since then, Mr. Hill. A couple of immediate reactions, I think. This is a terrific conversation to have now when you look at the broader framework, not just in terms of the general issues of sustainability, energy costs, and so forth, but when you look at how the transportation community is dealing with the crisis of financing infrastructure, not just the immediate crisis that the MTA, for example, faces, that I'm sure many, if not most of everyone in the audience is familiar with our massive deficits, probably a $20 billion roughly deficit on the capital side for our next capital program from 2010 to 2014, and then an operating deficit right now really driven by the fact we had to borrow so much money for the 2000-2004 plan. But going beyond that, the national conversation where you see again, on both sides, from a bipartisan perspective, an orientation toward public-private partnership, and then with the diminishing highway trust fund, the fact that's basically broke, had to be supplemented by Congress, most recently I think last month, and that prospect, and a general consensus within the transportation community that our sector should move in general, and this is tentative, but some movement at a philosophical level to get to a mechanism going past the Highway Trust Fund to having a pay-as-you-go kind of mechanism. The general, I sit on the National Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission. We are looking at that, and again, as some of you may know, the general wisdom will take us 10 to 15 years to transition to such a mechanism. But that seems to be a very popular thought. And so when you then talk about transit in that context, and generally in the past, the transit reaction has been PPP may work for airports, it may work for highways. In terms of transit, so far, at least in the American context, limited application. Obviously, places like West Side Yards, as we are doing, obviously with the MTA not playing the kind of role the MTR has, but using private developers. Although some of you may recall Peter Calico, in the middle of that whole conversation, put out there, it was shot down pretty quickly, that the MTA developed the West Side Yards. Other than that, not a lot of receptivity, but you then look at this, and where this might go, it certainly, you can see some potential convergence downstream, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So that's, so the immediate reaction is first, there's more relevance here than one might immediately think, which is I'm sure why Carol and Tom and others have put this together. Then going past that, I do want to remind people that we kind of started, our origins are where MTR is. As almost all of you know, the New York City transit system was private, and our commuter rail lines were private. What occurred in the 1950s and 1960s when we as a society made a decision driven by technology and also values to suburbanize, to move away from these models, with all things driving that. And so we went from this in the 1950s, 60s, and now we're in the 2000s. And so obviously there is this broader social, political conversation in terms of what we want our society to be. But if that conversation moves in that direction, certainly there's actually a history institutionally of entities, certainly like the MTA, Transit, Port Authority, and so forth, to deliver it. Obviously much different. I would also point out that if you look at fare box recovery ratio in terms of the subway lines that we operate and commuter rail lines, we could make a profit pretty easily. I mean, I'm not sure I want to say that we're going to go private and put out shares. I'm not sure how well we do today. But where we lose money at the MTA, where we don't have the kind of profitability that MTR has, is primarily, is not when you look at when we operate with the kind of density that exists in Hong Kong, basically within the Manhattan frame, but is when you look at fare box recovery ratios in terms of our service out to Staten Island, our bus networks out there. We operate a bus system, they don't. You could actually see, when you do the analogies, how New York City Transit could make money, and then again, if there was the political, social desire not to operate the kind of hours of service that we do, that you could get into the area of profitability. Again, it's not exactly analogous because we don't own the land, although, as Mr. Hope pointed out, MTR had to purchase this at Greenfields. It wasn't that, I had been under the impression that a lot of this land had been government owned. It was more that you were given the right to do that. The last point I would make is that this appears to have, potential relevance as we talk about a 20 to 40 year time frame in terms of development in the New York region, at least as far as MTA goes. And so when you already have existing lines, and the MTA institutionally had looked at 2nd Avenue and East Side access, Tom described that most of you are familiar with. Unfortunately, what I was told, and I suspect, and I assume this is the case, that basically the East Side, some of you may know the answer, the East Side is already zoned, for 2nd Avenue. So we've had the conversation about how we might recapture some of the value for the MTA, but my understanding, 2nd Avenue, where that's most relevant, is that's already zoned for that. Obviously, the real estate sector is not particularly enthusiastic about this. That's not a surprise. But some of that zoning, I believe, is my understanding, has already taken into account some of these capacity expansion projects. But there will be a need to look forward, as we've done together with RPA, in terms of where you go beyond that. I don't know if you want me to hype, Tom, the report I think you put out today.
Well, I appreciate, always love hype.
There is a relevance. I don't know how much the audience is familiar with the report you just released, I guess, yesterday?
This morning.
Or this morning. But there is a relevance, certainly, in trying to tie together at a planning level, the projects that one might do theoretically in the next 25 years. And then I think, and so to conclude, I would say that we as a society have to decide if that's the vision that we want. You then get into having the land use support that vision. And then I think institutionally, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. In fact, that's how this institution began in terms of trying to affect that. But clearly, MTR has taken it to an extraordinary level, and we are most appreciative and wowed by what you've done.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee.